Good morning, everyone. Today's March 11th. Today's the last session before we deal with the operating budget for FY25. Thank you so much for being here. And it's an exciting day because we have two items that we're going to be following up. The first one is on the office market vacancy work. We had that session back in September, so today's a follow-up on that. Thank you to our partners and everybody who has taken time to really contribute to this conversation. And then the second item that we're going to be having today is a work session on the restaurant industry follow-up, streamlining the permitting process, among other things. So I'm glad that they are here. And with that, Mr. Bilal, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Yes, this is very much an exciting session. We'll be following up on the September office vacancy discussion that you all held. As you had directed, you received a memo outlining some strategies from Margrave Strategies. We have a representative, Sarah Miller, here to speak to that. That was then distilled with some data-driven research and outreach by MCEDC, as well as planning and council staff working together to sort of figure out a strategy from that. And so we'll outline some of the next steps and some of the background. We have some slides. I don't know if we can pull those up. I just wanted to present some background, just given the density of the staff packet, if that's helpful. So hopefully those will get pulled up in a moment. But basically, the staff packet kind of outlines that there is, changing demand for office. Thank you. It's just a quick overview. Yeah, so basically, the pandemic had the impact of changing demand for office. Work schedules for a large portion of workers are moving towards hybrid schedules. And so a lot of businesses are going to need less space going forward. They're consolidating space also because of cost savings and just to anticipate fewer workers in the office. But of course, not all businesses are reacting that way. And then, of course, workers' demands for office spaces are changing too, so they can compete with the convenience of working from home and sort of what technology enables there, and some of the conveniences of having services nearby to support your lifestyle. And so these are things that are going to change what people require of office going forward. And that means new office will have some predictable trends, but importantly, office spaces that lack some of these qualities may be becoming obsolete or defunct. And this is just a very high-level way to kind of understand that there are different buckets of office space with different tiers, different quality and characteristics. So although not a scientific taxonomy, year built in class is a helpful way to sort of dissect the market at a high level. And what should be apparent is, different types of office space are going to require different interventions, and all of those different interventions will have varying impacts on reducing office vacancy to the extent that the office market is not linear. It's sort of lumpy, with development trends and things like that. And just to illustrate what I mean there, if you look at, for example, 1980s buildings, there's a relatively high vacancy rate above the overall vacancy rate in these buildings. The sort of class mix is potentially somewhat arbitrary, but the point is, this represents over a third of the office space, in part because of maybe historical policy reasons. There are explanations for it, but if indeed demand for office space is less and these products are defunct given their age and quality, then perhaps the solution would be to demolish and redevelop, which may not require much county intervention to the extent that the market is already intervening in some of this, but those are the kinds of activities that might be appropriate for this type of space. And obviously, having some impact there would, reducing office vacancy amongst these types of buildings would have a big impact on reducing office vacancy overall, just given the large amount. On the other hand, we've had some new buildings that were delivered during the pandemic. Sort of unlucky timing there where they're remaining vacant, even though they're trophy spaces that are in demand and highly amenitized and desirable locations, and so the intervention there would be to help support leasing those buildings. That's just more of a traditional economic development initiative. Critically important to do and achieve, but in terms of reducing overall office vacancy, which is a subject of this discussion, it's going to have a much smaller impact than reducing some of the more defunct space, which there's a lot of. And again, this isn't a scientific taxonomy, so somewhere in between obsolete, defunct buildings and buildings that we want to fill, there are buildings that may require limited interventions, maybe some funding to help upgrade them to make them more attractive. Maybe it's converting them to some other employment use or even housing where appropriate. It's hard to know what those buildings are, where they are, but allowing for those buildings to approach the council for resources to potentially identify what the solutions could be and whether there's support to do something there is something to consider. And for some of these buildings, the county may actually be uniquely positioned to help to the extent that the financial interventions are limited and the county may be able to leverage its authority to make differences here, whereas the market forces will help sort of take care of some of the larger chunks of office space on either ends of this distribution. So some buildings, as we noted, may have the potential for upgrades and conversions. Some buildings, like the older Class A buildings built in the 90s, maybe require some pay, maybe some more conference rooms, upgrade the conference rooms with more mics and create more collaborative spaces and add some windows. Those kinds of features may make them more attractive. There might be large lab spaces that need to be divided because there are a lot of growth stage businesses that need small to medium-sized spaces. Some buildings may be suitable for conversion to wet lab, and there is precedent of this in the county as well, and the county has supported those efforts. And indeed, some buildings may be viable for conversions to housing, which has also occurred in this county. In terms of upgrading space or conversions to wet lab, the county may have a unique position here and an opportunity because there's kind of a market gap in terms of the risk proposition here for developers and property owners that have large space or need to convert their space. The demand is there in terms of the number of businesses that want to seek the space, but they may not be able to commit to long lease terms that make a property owner comfortable to make those investments. So there may be an opportunity to support that gap, sort of ensure that risk, and thereby create a supply of space that growing businesses can take up while also helping to reduce office vacancy. And similarly, the county may be able to support upgrades and conversions to, say, community uses or housing using a similar kind of approach and thinking. So we outlined 5 steps in the memo, which again distills the expertise here at the table, and I'm excited to open it up to them. But just at a high level, the first one was establish a pilot program to support any strategy that would reduce office vacancy, including conversions to any use or upgrading the quality of the office space. The idea here is just that, and the reason it's number one is, we're entering budget season, as the committee chair referenced, and so there may be an opportunity to think about some financial intervention here. Maybe it's a pilot program, and you intake some applications from properties that propose what they will do, identify what costs there are, and maybe that kind of helps test the waters of what policies make sense, what interventions make sense, and while also signaling to the community that the council's, paying attention to this issue and wants to do something about it. And so maybe there's, an RFP process, relatively open-ended guidelines, and a target of 2 to 5 projects to sort of see what works in terms of, leveraging that county's authority in those smaller financial interventions. Staff would need to evaluate the dollar amount necessary, the mechanisms for the fund, but again, it's the first idea because we're entering the budget season. So. The second recommendation here is to refer to the PHP committee the need to study existing employment zones, in particular the EOF zone. Again, to the extent that the market is intervening here, to the extent that the council will undertake any other effort, it would be prudent to make sure there are no other policy obstacles in the way that prevent conversions. So that's making sure that the zoning and regulatory regime is consistent with what the county's intentions are for supporting a change and redevelopment in these defunct office spaces. So just, the idea here is remove those barriers to enable demolition, redevelopment, or conversions to other uses, or utilize a fund, whatever the case may be. I think the planning department would be well positioned to evaluate that, and the planning department is already evaluating the EOF zone as part of the 4 incentive zones. So they'll be coming with that in the fall, so maybe they can speak to it during that update, but also in general as part of this discussion as well. So Moving on, similarly, both planning and DPS could evaluate the possibility of reducing timelines for review or permitting for conversions, as the case may be. I think you'd have to really understand what those steps are, what could be shortened, and whether that would be a priority given other things that receive priority in development and permitting review, but it's definitely worth considering. And they could provide an update in the summer or fall of this year. And this is sort of speaks to the more ongoing, larger strategy of economic development that the council will continue to do. This is, studying and updating business retention and attraction strategies, growing entrepreneurship and businesses in the county. And this is just an ongoing discussion and effort. And finally, again, because we are in budget season, and as MCEDC outlined in their slides, which are an attachment to this staff report, public investment can attract private investment. So some CIP projects do have economic development aspects that are worthwhile to consider as priorities for their evaluation potentially. So with that, that's a lot of talking, and I'll turn it back over to the committee chair and our experts to answer some questions.
Thank you so much. One of the best things that we have going on here today is that this group and this committee have been working for quite a long time on retention, attraction of businesses and jobs into this county. So this is just this conversation is part of that larger goal. Sarah, would you like to go next?
I can go next.
Yes.
If you have specific questions, or do you want me to just chat for a bit about?
Yes.
The first time that Margrave was involved with this was in the fall, and we were asked to kind of give an overview of what we thought after the September 11th meeting about office vacancies. And we looked a little bit at some options that would help the county evolve into this new hybrid work situation. One of the things that we talked about, and I'm not sure that the memo is in the packet that we wrote, but I think that you had sent it out, and so most people have seen it. Probably our favorite recommendation, I think, out of all of them was looking at the model that San Francisco had done, but they had done it with the help of Gensler, and Gensler had created a matrix originally actually for industry in Canada, because as industry moved and closed down, they were left with a lot of hollowed out urban areas as well. That then became applicable to the hybrid work model here. And San Francisco put out a pilot, as Bilal talked about, to ask basically people for information about their buildings. And they said, the San Francisco said, come to us, tell us why you think your building is good for conversion to housing in this case, so not labs, but just housing. And we understand that it's difficult, but tell us everything that you would need us to do in ways that we could intervene, whether that be legislatively, financially, or what have you. And so when we wrote the memo in, I think it was October, they were just then getting information in. So since then, they have received 8 viable buildings, which now San Francisco has a lot of vacancies. So it seems like a very small amount, and it truly is, but it's kind of a good first step to let you know how their policies are actually working. And so they have 8 buildings that are interested in conversion. If all of the 8, and they haven't decided yet, if all of the 8 would be converted, it would be 1,100 units, and they would all be downtown. So it's another small step in trying to figure out how do we live in this new world of hybrid and downtowns. Some other things that they did legislatively before getting those applicants in were small things like waiving requirements for housing downtown, so that you wouldn't need to always have a rear yard and other things like that. So as Bilal talks about all of the layers of addressing this is just something to see San Francisco doing in real time. I would also say that California allocated $400 million of financial incentives to convert commercial office space to housing. This was part of an existing program that they had. It's called the Infill Infrastructure Program that has been around for a while, but in FY23 the governor said this is specifically $400 million rather, for affordable housing conversions. And as of today, they have 55 applicants. Now this is again around the state. 55 applicants for $105 million. So I know we had talked about, we weren't going to talk a lot about numbers today, but we did pop in a couple numbers here. But that kind of actually the 55 applicants for 105 is about 2 million. So we think, depending on the pilot project, we think about 5 to 10 would be good. Is there more? I feel like I've
Oh, that's
gone
great.
through it. Okay.
No, that was great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
You just reminded me that some folks may know I was in Annapolis about a month ago testifying on the Housing Production Fund from Delegate Stewart. He passed, finally, and they allocated $5 million for that fund. It may seem very, very, very small because it's at the state level, but baby steps, right? So we're happy that that's moving forward. Thank you for that, and thank you for highlighting San Francisco's model, because I'm also paying attention to that one too. Now we're gonna pass it to Mr. Robert Cronenberg from Planning, and as you speak, can you please emphasize the schedule that you have for the EOF zones, and when are you planning to wrap that up? And then hopefully we're gonna have a session in the PHP committee as well.
Sure.
On this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with that. So we are undertaking the incentive zoning update, which is really geared towards public benefit points for 4 of the zones. It's CR, CRT, EOF, and LSC. What our study has shown is we haven't really seen that much activity in either the LSC or the EOF zones. The majority have been in the CR or CRT. We will be we're starting recommendations or putting together recommendations right now as we have been working with a technical working group over the last year. And the intent is that we would be wrapping that up at the end of the summer. As part of coming to PHP, going to the board, all of that would be coming towards the end of the summer. I think one of the major issues that that Mr. Ali's memo points out is that, especially for conversions, the biggest hurdle for EOF zones is the 30% residential. So regardless of a conversion or if they wanted to do something else on the site and it's still EOF, they still have that cap. And so for a conversion, which really wouldn't go through development review, that just goes to permitting for the most part, it runs the issue of not being able to do as much housing as they want to do on the site. What we would get involved with at that point would be any kind of adequate public facility review. In most cases, we wouldn't see it other than that. And we have been working with DHCA to make sure that any housing that does come in on office conversions still do apply the MPDUs that are necessary for them. So, I think with the incentive zoning, we'll be seeing a lot more of that over the next 4 to 5 months. Through our master plan process, we have changed some of the EOF zones to a more flexible CR zone, whether it's a CR or CRT zone. And I think one of those you'll see in the near future is probably ComSat. That's an EOF zone that probably doesn't make sense to convert that as it is right now to a residential, although that's just what we've heard. So I think that's one of the larger sites that is an EOF zone that I think when you look at how office is converted to residential, some make sense and some don't, as Mr. Ali just said in his presentation. But we do evaluate all those sites that through the master plan process as well. I realize those take a little bit longer. They're not as simple as a conversion or language in the code to make sure that you can convert the residential or office as you'd like to residential. But we do have a number of master plans ongoing that do have the EOF zone in them that we will be reevaluating for a more flexible zone.
Thank you so much
Sure.
for that update, Mr. Cronenberg. So, Mr. Stewart, this is your last session as part of the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. And we're so happy that you have been working with us for all this time, and I know you're not going too far away. You're going to stay around. But since you're here today, as in the capacity of MCEDC, I want to, as you speak, I do would love for you to highlight 2 things, and that's really in terms of attraction and expansion of jobs, because that's really the forte for the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. And how do you see this whole effort of supporting office to lab conversions, right? And how can that because at the end of the day, we're talking about an innovation fund here, right? Making sure that we can allow and support these conversions and support businesses to do this type of work. So if you can speak in light to that, that would be great.
Sure. I'll try and cover a lot of things. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Committee Chair Fani-González. Thank you, the rest of the committee members and Council President Andrew Friedson. So I appreciate the opportunity you gave us to do the research and look at this. And I wish there were a simple answer. There's not. I think the research that we did really proves that it's a complicated issue that almost everywhere in the entire United States is facing, and in reality, almost everywhere in the world. So if there were simple solutions, somebody would have already figured them out. And even places who felt they've had bold solutions to these have not made much progress on getting things changed as a result of that. So I'm happy to be joined here by my colleagues, Prayas Nyapani, who is responsible for business attraction, as you mentioned, and Colleen Coyne, who's our research and business analyst, who did a lot of the fundamental work for us on this. So I'll start with a general overview and get to your specific questions. I think one of the interesting things I read in the last 2 weeks as we've been wrapping up our research is that you have to think of the office market as not being overbuilt, but under demolished. And I think Mr. Ali really got to that point earlier. We have a lot of buildings here that have just simply aged and are probably past their useful life for any purpose. And as a result of that, we think about opportunities to convert them to housing or laboratory, where the most honest, best use of them is to be demolished and the land to be converted to something else. Now, there may be limitations because of the zoning about what that can be converted to, and those are issues that can be addressed. But I think another really legitimate issue is time. And it's important to realize that time costs money. And one of the challenges we have here in Montgomery County is our processes are incredibly long. And so I think there are a lot of challenges which cause developers and owners to not consider options like that just because they're overwhelmed by the fact that it was about 2 weeks ago, a building owner said it would take them 3 years to be able to demolish a building and convert it, build something else there. And that's just not something feasible in this economic environment with the rates that people have, particularly when you have a building where you're borrowing money to demolish it, borrowing money to build it, and not collecting revenue for years at a time. So I think anything that could be done to consolidate that time frame and maybe figure out a strategy or a priority to identify properties which are in the best interest of the public to be converted or demolished is ideal. And I think that can be a couple of things. They can be places where you simply don't want empty buildings in a neighborhood, encouraging activities that you don't want to happen in those neighborhoods. They can be places that Mr. Ali mentioned the CIP program. I think there certainly are opportunities to think about how existing places which are underutilized or non-utilized buildings could be public spaces or amenities. I think the example from a couple of months ago where Parks purchased a property on Old Georgetown Road across the street from Pike and Rose to tear down a building and convert it to a public space is an incredible idea. I think there are other opportunities that fall into that too. Are there neighborhoods that we always wish had been connected with each other, but because of the way things were built and over time, just that has never occurred. So I think there are opportunities like that that are thoughtful considerations. Are there hundreds of those, tens of those? Probably not. There are probably single-digit numbers of those that could probably have transformational outcomes in different parts of the county. So I'd encourage the committee and its partners to think about ideas like that. A couple things specifically, I mentioned converting these to housing is very difficult. These buildings were never designed for that. Converting it to lab is also very difficult. The other thing with converting it to lab is we actually have reached a point where there is an adequate supply of lab space overall in the county. There's been a lot of building new laboratory space during the pandemic and a lot of conversion of existing buildings to laboratory space. As a result, we have adequate supply. There's actually office lab space that's not filled now. And over the last few months, you've seen what you would expect to see. We've seen the lease rates for those buildings decrease. We've seen the number of, the amount of space that's up for lease increasing, and we've seen the amount of space that's available for sublease starting to increase. So I think there's adequate supply. I think what Mr. Ali got at was something that's actually very interesting, as I mentioned at a previous ECON committee hearing. Even though there's an adequate supply, it doesn't necessarily adequately meet the needs of our businesses. Those are two very different issues. And so There is a space between about 3 and 10,000 square feet where the market today doesn't necessarily address those businesses well. Part of that is we have incubator space, whether it's public, the Germantown Innovation Center, or private from other businesses here in the county, where you can get small, less than 3,000 square foot spaces. They're intended to take high-risk tenants. They sort of build that into their business model. They know they'll have transitions very quickly. They hope to continue to fill them. It's really a challenge for these companies that aren't quite large enough to have sustainable funding or in the public markets and those sorts of things to move into that intermediate space, which is between 3 and 10,000 square feet typically. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to encourage that. Some of the ways to encourage it I've discussed would be to provide some sort of financial backstop to make sure that the landlords are willing to make those leases to the businesses who move into them. They're typically not ideal candidates from a financial perspective because, as you know, most of these companies will go 10 or 15 years without generating $1 in revenue and rely upon venture capital and other sources of funding. I think that's about the right size. Once you get past that, it starts to get, you're really in a commercial space. A couple of things I would recommend is if you do think about that. One, most of these leases are about 5 years in nature. That's typically what we'll sign. It gets to be complex when you think about how people might misuse that system. So I'd encourage you to think about a backstop that's probably about 6 months in nature, which should provide an adequate amount of time to find a new tenant in the marketplace, rather than just simply saying, oh, if it doesn't work, the county's going to cover it. And the other is I would strongly encourage those spaces to be reproducible, reusable spec spaces. And there are companies here that have built labs like that as a model, which are intended, there's no customization done. They're typically 50 to 60% lab space. The balance is office space. They'll have the casework and benches set into they're adaptable for doing work with cells, doing basic biology work and those sorts of things. But the intention is if someone does leave for financial reasons, can't sustain that, you should be able to turn it over very quickly with really doing nothing than moving the furniture out and moving new furniture back in. So I think those are great ideas to think about that lets the market function and maybe remove some friction on it. The last point you asked was about attraction and expansion. So Preyas gave a presentation to you a couple of months ago talking about business attraction. It's a priority for us and something we really work on. A couple of things, it is a very long time it takes for some of these projects. I think anything that happens in less than 18 to 24 months is a miracle. So it really is building a long-term pipeline of opportunities. When companies think about moving or relocating to somewhere else, these aren't short-term decisions. They're significant decisions that change their businesses. So he's working hard to build that pipeline, and I think over the next 2 years we'll see that. The reality is no one's moving anywhere in this country right now. Companies are where they are. They're trying to think about how they can cut their real estate footprints, how they can keep the workers that they have and try and engage them in the office that they have. So generally, if they're moving locally to smaller, nicer spaces, which we see here in Montgomery County. It'll be interesting. I don't know whether it's a challenge or opportunity. The city of DC, as you know, is having a much bigger challenge than Montgomery County has or will ever have in this regard. So whether that plays to our benefit over the next couple of years and companies move out of the city to Montgomery County or buckle down there, we'll see. I don't think anyone knows yet how that's going to turn out. Retention and expansion, we are definitely working hard on that, but I think anything which incentivizes people to move here to Montgomery County, to grow here in Montgomery County, is incredibly helpful to us. I think that would have a tremendous impact not only on our economy, but also on trying to deal with the issue of vacant office space. In addition to that, I'll say as my last point, we also want to realize that we have a lot of global companies already here in Montgomery County. So part of what we need to do is encourage them to add their next 10 or 100 employees in Montgomery County and not some other location they already have elsewhere in the world. And so I think that's an opportunity for us to be really competitive and say, we want you here, we want to do business with you here, we want your employees to work here, live here, play here. So with that, I will conclude, and there's certainly more questions.
Is there a list of all these big companies that we have in Montgomery County working to create the next generation of STEM, professionals. Is there a list of those companies working with MCPS right now?
I don't have it. I know MCPS has a group of people who work with the businesses. I also know that on April 17th, there's a meeting with the Ready Institute, which is run by USG, but collaborating with MCPS and MC to bring together their efforts to try and collect data across all those systems. So that might be the best source of information on that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to follow up on that. And also, as you guys recall, the first session that we have in this committee back in January, feels like a long time ago, 2023. I talked about MCPS. In many places around the world, you see that kids already in middle school, that's when they start getting their vocational certifications for, mechanics, electronics, whatever you can think of. It starts in middle school. We're not even there yet. So if we really are serious as a community to talk about attraction and retention, of making sure that business expand with the talent that we have in Montgomery County, I think that's key, and making sure that we continue to attract the best teachers in Montgomery County, the best nurses in Montgomery County. We already have the bonuses program with the police department. We want to have high quality police officers, which is great, but we also want to have high quality teachers and nurses and technicians. So I look forward to the operating budget for the county executive and see quite a few people from his office in the back of the room. That budget is coming out on Thursday, and as everybody knows, we as a committee have been working closely with county executive to ensure that we have an innovation fund. I don't know the details, but I cannot wait until Thursday. And we're going to dig into them in this committee during FY25 work sessions and see how we can use all the information that we have gathered, including the work that we have done with the memo, how that translates into money, into funding. But because at the end of the day, all these things are not free. And I want to ask you, and before, I don't know if you guys have any remarks to say to compliment Mr. Stewart?
I'll talk a little bit about business attraction, Councilmember. So you mentioned a little bit about what we're doing around that. One of the things that we're hearing from site selectors nationally as well as globally is that companies right now are reluctant to make decisions. Even though they had started a project around expansion or relocation, at this point everyone is holding on. They are not making any decisions at the moment, and I think that has to do with the perception of not everyone understanding what's happening in the market. So companies are hesitant to do that because they don't want to send a very different message out. So I think based on what we're hearing, you might see a little bit more announcements happening in a year or 2 years' time, especially now that a lot of the tech companies, some of the larger companies have gone away with remote work policy. They're at a hybrid model. So depending on what happens and how that stakes up, I think you'll see a lot more announcements and maybe even projects coming down the pike. So for right now, I think that the market is still very slow, and a lot of the movement that you're seeing, the local brokers will tell you they're very active, but they're mostly working with clients that are already in market, but no one from out of the market.
Thank you for that. Mr. Cronenberg, before I open up to the committee to ask question, the presentation, the work that you're doing in the planning department with the zoning, are you also going to, and I know we talked about this on the side, are you also going to identify those buildings that maybe they shouldn't be demolished, there's potential for them to be converted, but maybe we need to change the zoning for those buildings? Based on their location? Is that going to be part of the work or not?
Not as part of the incentive zoning update. We've identified sites, but not necessarily the buildings and kind of their function or their lifespan or longevity.
That still works, yeah.
But I think we did provide some information to Mr. Ali that did focus on some of the vacant office buildings that do go in line with the ideas and the thinking of how to evaluate those for conversions.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. So we're going to start with Councilmember Balcombe.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. And And thanks for the presentation and the update. I think one of the things that resonated from the last session was the utilization rate. We have the vacancy rate, but we also have utilization, so we know that there's a bit of a cliff about in what's going to happen when leases come due. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well. And I appreciate, Mr. Stewart, the concept of under demolition. I think that's an interesting concept to think about. And I think it's exciting to look at the options. We're at a pivotal point in terms of how we do work and where we do our work. And again, as Mr. Stewart mentioned, there's no risk of going too fast. However, I think that this is a monumental shift in work. And I think that we need to be prepared for the future. We don't know what that future is. So I think that being very strategic and looking at these conversions and how we're going to do it. Again, we're not going to be converting these buildings tomorrow, but I think it's strategic. And again, the mid-sized lab space, I think that's something that we can start looking at now and how we can nurture those companies. We do a very good job at the beginning. We do a very good job when they're big. We've got to figure out that middle part. In terms of demolition and conversion, one of the things that I'm concerned about is affordability for businesses, right? Very similar to the conversation that we're having about naturally occurring affordable housing. Some of these buildings are naturally occurring affordable rents for businesses. And so when we demolish these buildings and convert these buildings, we're going to be doing away with rents and some businesses aren't going to be able to succeed. So I think we need to be very considerate about how that's going to work for many businesses who are the businesses who are, although they're all not vacant, so some people are in these older buildings and they will not be able to afford going into higher rents. So that we need to be cautious about that. And then, I've got on Mondays both Councilmember Glass and I have both T&E and ECON, and sometimes they're so overlapping. And in this regard, the T&E committee is currently looking at two regulations: the BEPS regulation for the environmental sustainability and transportation demand management, both of which have profound impact on commercial development and commercial buildings. So in terms of conversion and renovation of buildings, we have this overlay of the requirements of the building standards, environmental standards. So I think we can't look at this issue without looking at the requirements for BEPS, and some of these buildings are going to have to be have significant renovation, particularly the older buildings, and so that's just going to be part of that conversation. And then also the transportation demand management regulations. There's in some cases significant requirements for employers. So at the time that we're trying to get people back into the office, we're incentivizing employers to keep people out of the office and working at home. So we've got conflicting priorities, which we often do have conflicting priorities, and so we need to keep those in mind. So I think that has to be part of the discussion about conversions. Workforce development, totally agree with the chair. I do know that the MCPS has dual enrollment now for certification, but you're right in that we need to bring it way down into middle school. So Those are my remarks, and I appreciate it, and thank you for bringing this panel back. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Great questions. Just a reminder, because you mentioned, I think it was Mr. Stewart, mentioned the CAP, the importance of the CAP projects and how they impact economic development and office conversions and all that great stuff. We have a great example coming out tomorrow during our council session with the Wheaton headquarters retail space, where we are going to be investing $4 million if the full council agrees. I know this committee agreed already. Same thing in Glenmont with that particular property, where we're asking $452,000 as another CIP project, plus the North Bethesda metro station project. I mean, we have quite a few. So just saying that because this county is already doing that, we just want more and to continue being specific about those projects. With that, Councilmember Evan Glass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your comments and those of Councilmember Balcombe, and I agree with what you've all said. I've been taking copious notes, so I'm forgive me if my questions jump around a little bit, but I'll start with Mr. Stewart. Thank you for your service to the county and all your work at MCEDC. The comments you made about demolition of office space, something that we talked about a number of sessions ago, and in this follow the bouncing ball of economic development and of land use, other way of saying that is in a holistic way of looking at land use and office space. We had a very good conversation about sports and rec activities, and so clearly I appreciate those comments that you made, because some of these spaces could be converted to other uses, and I agree with that. With regard to the vacancy rates, I'm intrigued by the comments you made about the sweet spot being 3,000 to 10,000 square feet. And in just looking at the data that's in the packet, there's currently about a 22% vacancy rate in our Class A trophy space. With those two data points in mind, what do you suspect or think is the building class where this 3,000 to 10,000 square foot office space could be accommodated?
Yeah, so my comment about 3,000 to 10,000 was just about lab space.
Just about lab space?
Not office space in general. So.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I said I was taking copious notes, so I had that. Keeping with that theme, Councilmember Balcombe, we serve on the two committees together. We spend a lot of time together, and she read my mind with regard to building energy performance standards. We cannot have this conversation without adding that to the context. And it just so happened on Thursday, the last T&E committee session before we dive into the budget, we'll be talking about building energy performance standards with our life sciences partners, because we want to make sure that as we go green and improve the efficiency of our largest sector of carbon emitting sector, which is our infrastructure building sector of 52%, we have to have this conversation. From your perspectives, because you will not be at that panel on Thursday, the sector itself will be, and industry leaders. But in your conversations and observations, how do you see the vacancy rate, the conversions, and this additional need, financial need, that is pending? How do we square that from your perspectives?
So I'll try to answer it all. Feel free to follow up if I don't.
Sure.
I'm glad both you and Councilmember Balcombe mentioned BEPS, right? And there's a lot of things that should go into this very complex thought process of where you prioritize buildings to be demolished or to support that effort. BEPS is a really important one. We have a lot of buildings here in Montgomery County that are of an age and in the current market that simply will never financially be able to comply with the BEPS standards. It's just not possible. If you look at something built in the 80s or 90s, the amount of money that would be required to invest in those properties to bring them up to the standards as they increase, both the county and the state standards, it's not a good financial investment. My worry would be if the council or the county don't do anything, they will just sit there vacant forever, which I think is sort of the worst possible outcome. So I think that's an important thing to take into account is an opportunity to deal with issues like that, because we don't want vacant buildings for years just sitting there. For most of us, these newer buildings come closer to the existing BEP standards as they are. It's interesting, you look at some of the older buildings, Councilmember Balcombe talked about people potentially not having affordable office space, as Mr. Ali talked about in his report. Many of those sometimes occur in what are called Class C office buildings. They tend to be small, one-story, sort of condo type things you see, not a strip mall, but something similar to that. Those tend to be older and generally better built, to be quite honest, and because they're single condo units, it's easier to place the HVAC for one owner or the light bulbs or other things which might be more efficient. So I think that's a great opportunity to maybe support those ones that are a little financially challenging, but still allow those things to happen. I think you'll find Thursday, and I've been fortunate enough to work with the prior Fed committee and other people as the BEPS program has been sort of rolled out and thought about and regulations implemented. One thing I think that's a challenge is, and I think now you've seen it, is just understanding the very different uses of energy in some of these types of companies. In the life sciences industry, we do have very high energy use because we have, and water use, because we have facilities that have to keep cells alive all day. They have to run 24/7, 365. Manufacturing may occur. They've got high ventilation requirements to keep them safe. So I think my experience has been through these discussions, the committee's been very willing to listen and understand that even though we all have the same high standards, there are different types of buildings which may have different needs that need to get met.
Thank you for that, and that is exactly why the committee is being very deliberate and having conversations with the different sectors, with different building types and different needs, because this is complex. So I appreciate that response. Speaking about the money that's needed to maybe make these retrofits, whether it's in office condos, as you alluded to, or some other ones, Ms. Miller, I appreciate you sharing that California is doing a $400 million investment. I wish we could do that here. We don't see that coming from Annapolis. We certainly don't see that coming here, but that is a big investment for a big state, right? And so understanding that there needs to be some incentive for those changes that need to be made. So thank you for elevating that. And then lastly, in keeping with the theme of finance, the chair rightfully noted that as we continue taking up the CIP, we are striking a balance between the needs of our residents to live their best lives on a daily basis and the investments needed for future economic growth. The North Bethesda Metro Station being probably one of the more marquee CIP investments, but there are others scattered throughout that nearly $6 billion document. And so we'll continue keeping an eye on that. And as last point I'll make, as the chair noted, with regard to the Wheaton office development, I will raise this tomorrow as well, but if we're going to invest in retail, we need to make sure people are back in the office, because it's a twofold issue. We want to make sure that our investment into that physical space is optimized, but two, whomever moves into that and signs a lease needs to make sure there are customers. So we set them up for success. And we'll have that conversation tomorrow, but thank you. I yield back.
I agree. Oh, so good that we have DPS here, and I hope they can send an email to your colleagues on that building to ensure that they're coming back to the office. Now we're going to pass it to Councilmember Laurie-Anne Sayles.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the entire panel for your updated remarks regarding recommendations. I know the last time we met, there were a few questions that didn't get answered, but this packet truly showed the thoughtfulness of the decisions over the past few months. I, too, share the excitement of my colleagues about these new conversion options and the recommendations. This past Friday, we joined the Lieutenant Governor and members of the Transportation Department, the county's Economic Development Corporation, to examine the nexus between economic competitiveness and transportation. Thanks to technology and fluid boundaries between homes and businesses, this is a timely conversation, and we have, no choice but to make hard decisions to reimagine all these spaces, allowing more flexibility in choosing where people will work. In terms of the following steps, next steps, I especially liked how each of the recommendations addressed the who, the why, and the when. It would be nice to maybe see a chart to allow us to follow along the progress of each of these recommendations. And so it's been observed that the assigned roles and responsibilities, I saw mentions of the county council, but not much regarding the county executive, the economic development committee's role, small business navigators' role, particularly with the implementation of these recommendations, ensuring that close collaboration between the county's Economic Development Corporation, the county executive, and the council is more clear. As Brad mentioned, we're anticipating at least a 2 to 3 year timeline for implementation. And so it would be good to have more information about the conversations that are taking place to attract occupants to these spaces as they are anticipating transitions. And so I don't know if anyone wants to share more about the conversations that are going to be facilitated.
I'll just take a stab at just to start, which is that these are high-level next steps that we were hoping to get some input from you all. So if you support them, then we can start to sort of think about how to implement them and create a little more of a targeted scheme to do that and identify all the players and actors more explicitly. So.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Thank you. And so as we consider these implementations, the recommendations of the implementing the recommendations, I appreciated the mention of the District of Columbia. Sarah mentioned California, but further analysis on places more similar to Montgomery County. We're constantly being compared to Fairfax, Loudoun County, and they're navigating the changing dynamics of this marketplace, but they're doing it in a better way. I'm hearing about the challenges with the widening of 270, the American Legion Bridge. Just navigating these business centers are creating a barrier for any sort of forward progress in our region. And so more information about its impacts and opportunities would be very helpful in ensuring we have a clear approach. And then lastly, Brad, you mentioned several insightful ideas regarding the strategic selection of locations and how we're going to prioritize which buildings we're going to focus on first with regards to financially, what makes most sense, proximity to neighboring business environments, other projects. To strengthen these 5 recommendations, it would be beneficial to, I don't know how we would create a fiscal note, but that would be helpful to hear about a fiscal note, transportation opportunities, as well as a racial equity and social justice impact statement, places that have not seen investment, how are we prioritizing those areas, and what significant investments do we anticipate in those areas? Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I basically, when I read the memo, I was stuck in page 4, just because it's the one that speaks most to me on the whole conversation. expansion and attraction of businesses, which is one of the main, if not the main goal for the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, and the whole idea of having this innovation fund that I know the executive is working on, and I cannot wait to see the details on Thursday, and making sure that along the same lines that Mr. Stewart, I'm thinking of Delegate Stewart in the Maryland General Assembly, has said about making sure that we are also assisting with the leases and everything else that small businesses need in order to really thrive in Montgomery County and stay in Montgomery County. So looking forward to that conversation. And with that, and then we'll follow up during the, I'm gonna go to you for a second. We're gonna follow up in the FY25 operating budget, basically using the conversation that we're having and seeing what's coming from the executive and see how we can implement, especially with the points that Councilmember Sayles mentioned on equity areas that we need to focus on, but also uplifting the small businesses. And we'll follow up with NCPS on this whole idea of making sure we're really targeting our students to get certified early in middle school. With that, before we get to the next item, we're going to have briefly Council President Andrew Fritzen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank the committee for its work on office vacancy in particular, which is such a huge issue in our county, but in communities across the country, as Mr. Stewart mentioned. I mean, this is not unique to Montgomery County. It's a real challenge. The marketplace is changing dramatically, and the built environment does not reflect those changes, and so there needs to be an effort to look into how we help to move those things forward. So I really appreciate the work that has happened on that, of really thinking how we repurpose space. I think we have to get out of the point, as I've said before, of conversion and really think about repurposing, because that is more all-encompassing. Sometimes that means taking the actual physical plant and changing what it does and who it serves and how it works. But sometimes it means taking a building out of service and building a new building that is much more reflective of the modern needs of the community. And I think we have to be a bit agnostic towards that and understand that, you know, we have to be able to support the needs that are there and allow the market to help move things forward, because we don't have $400 million, as Councilmember Glass noted. We wish we did. We wish the state was stepping up with, close to that, but unfortunately that's just not where we are. As you heard earlier, and I appreciate the mentions of the EOF zones, this is something that the Planning Department is taking up, that the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee is already working on, so I appreciate that it's included here, and that work is certainly ongoing. So stay tuned on that, and it's also part of a broader effort that we're looking into on zoning questions and repurposing of property. I did want to thank, I really appreciate Councilmember Balcombe for noting the conflicting priorities dynamic. This is a real issue and really something that needs to be discussed. These decisions don't happen in a vacuum. I think sometimes we talk about them and discuss them as if they do, so I appreciate that being uplifted at this committee, and we really need to think comprehensively about all the puts and takes and how the impacts are going to be. BEPS is certainly a part of that, but not the only part of that, and appreciate Councilmember Balcombe and Chair Fani-González for talking about the MCPS connection and the workforce pipeline, because we can't create jobs unless we have people to fill those jobs, and that really is the demand side of this, and really that's always been the hallmark and the secret sauce to Montgomery County. It's the talent that really makes everything go. And Councilmember Glass, I appreciate the point on Wheaton Retail, which I'm sure the chair appreciated as well, but the need to have people back in the office. That's about the daytime and lunchtime economy. It's also about the nighttime economy. You worked on the nighttime task force previously, and people in the office, they go to lunch, they spur the economy during the day, they stay out and meet colleagues and friends for dinner and for a drink after work. I mean, that is all part of how things go. So much is tied into that. With that, I just had one major question here. In terms of the vacancy, we talk about vacancy as if it's a binary situation, as if a building is either vacant or it's occupied. But it's not a bathroom. That's not how it works. it's a percentage of occupancy and a percentage of vacancy. Have we looked at what the thresholds are, and do we have a point at which a building that is a certain percentage vacant for a certain period of time means that it is no longer at maximum use? Is there a threshold? Is there a standard? Because how else are we looking at what is considered a vacant building? Because there are a lot of buildings that have one tenant, for instance, or two tenants that are on a long-term lease, but it's mostly vacant and it's not being filled anytime soon, if ever.
It's a great point, and in fact, actually, if you look at the distribution of vacancy amongst all office buildings, the vast majority are more than 50% occupied. So that threshold is hard to identify, I think. Something like 50% is sort of an arbitrary but useful standard. It's half full, half vacant is a starting point for identifying highly vacant. It depends also if a building is paid off, the property owner may be comfortable with an elevated vacancy rate compared to what might be expected in the marketplace. So I think it's a moving target. I think it's helpful to look at the distribution, and in fact, in the staff packet, I don't have it pulled up here, there is a distribution of buildings by vacancy rate. So using that as a starting point to get there, but I think it really does go on a building per building basis, really. Maybe looking at those tranches, quartiles might be one way to identify some of that, but we need to do a little more research.
It's clearly a case-by-case basis because every building is financed differently, and the dynamics of an individual property owner, are different, the individual leases and the timeline of those leases. But there is a huge dynamic in this of when the tenant improvement that would be required and the rent that would be received, or the landlord improvement, that would be received. Just the math doesn't work, and that is a big part of this question. So I would encourage on a macro level to really do some further work, and perhaps for the committee as a follow-up to really think through what is that now. Is 50% the right number? Is it not the right number? Really engaging the private sector on this, and some of the brilliant minds here at the table. I think that would be really helpful as part of this conversation to really understand, what are the buildings that we should be looking at in terms of that pool, and then how do we actually move the needle on that. So with that, thank you for responding to that, and I'll yield back to you, Madam Chair.
Next question, Councilmember Balcombe.
Not a question, just a comment. So much of what we're talking about is market, not so much, all of it is basically market driven, right? So I think this is very important discussion, and our role when we talk about who has what responsibility, I think our role is to make sure that we hear directly from brokers and owners in terms of what their intentions are, so that the county, so that the government can be ready to help facilitate. So whether that's incentives to fill a building, incentives to demolish a building, the process of demolition. So I think that we just need to be aware we're not going out and demolishing anything. We need the private sector here. So thank you.
That was a great comment, and that's exactly what San Francisco is doing. As Ms. Miller mentioned. And I think the analysis from the planning department that we're going to have coming up under the PHP committee will help with that, especially to inform the committee what programs we need to really move forward so we don't have empty buildings. And yes, Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, I just want to echo some of the comments. I think that anything we do to incentivize businesses to grow here, to bring employees here, has a huge impact, because it's really having those people who are moving into the county, working here, or supporting all of our retail, our restaurants, the dry cleaners, and other small businesses. So that's critical. I think a point, just as a project that's going on now that you can see where this sort of thing has happened, is the former Marriott headquarters on Rockledge, where you see a private investor is demolishing an old office building. They're building senior housing, which we desperately need here in the county. And I think those are the types of things where you think, and Councilmember Friedson sort of said, is, what are our county's needs today, not 25, 30 years ago? And I think that's a great opportunity. And one of the questions to the council is, how do you just ease the friction in the marketplace, right? Can you make that project move a year faster so that they can afford to finance it, or 2 years faster? Because that's someone who's willing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in our economy to meet a need that we desperately have. So
I look forward to a lot of work from the planning department on the review process, because that's what it is. With that, we really need to take the second item. Thank you so much for all your work, and Mr. Stewart, thank you for all your work with the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. The next panel is DPS, Mr. Sabakan and his team alongside Mr. Walsh from DHHS and partners. So I'll start by giving some background on why we're having this item. As you all know, a few months ago when Mr. Ravi Sabakan became director of DPS and we created this committee, I asked him to go with me for a tour of places that have had challenges with DPS getting their permits. Many of those places were restaurants across the county, and they all had the same story. We couldn't open on time. We were waiting for 6-7 months, and we were stuck in the permitting process. And then when we really looked into it, sometimes or many times, in terms of when it came to restaurants, the issue wasn't really DPS. The issue was mostly HHS with the permitting permits. So an idea was to see if we could do what Prince George's County has done, and thus moving the HHS permits for restaurants, moving them to DPS. So restaurants will have one stop, one place where they can just go to and get everything that they need to have done in order for them to open the restaurant. So that's the background. And I know we have quite a few things to discuss. And at some point, I do want to get into that recipe of success that the DPS promised at some point. And I hope we can have an update on that too. With that, Mr. Balal, can you please?
Sure. Thank you very much for the introductory comments. I think the staff report just reflects that. We'll just turn it over, I think, to DPS and the executive staff here to sort of explain the update from December.
Good morning. First and foremost, I want to say good morning to Councilmember Fani-González, Chair, and the entire committee, Council President Friedson. Yes, you hit it spot on in terms of we spoke on this the last work session. It's clearly apparent that the restaurant sector is a huge part of a small business challenge, needs that attention. When we say DPS, HHS, it's one government. It's one government, and we're here to collectively figure it out. What can it take to streamline process? If we want to prioritize and make small business, that priority to make our process conducive and easier for these small business to not only get started, but be sustainable, to maintain that it's going to take a collective effort. The update since the December work session, we have actually met with, as you referenced, Prince George's County DPI, to get a sense of how they were able to, set up that structure with their health reviewers under the building department, which is a little atypical. I was not aware until that had come to my attention, and we spoke to them and to the managers at least to get an idea for how that's working. Without data really being provided, I didn't really get a sense of how effective it was, other than the fact that it's been up and running. They have essentially 5 review staff that are working under the umbrella of DPI, under building permitting, but it's still a regulation that's under the health department. So it's a little unique, a little different than what I would be accustomed to. But as Committee Chair Gonzalez pointed out, it's a one-stop concept, which we are all for. I work with that in D.C., and that I think is the focus. How can we implement that one-stop concept, which has proven to be effective, not only for the county in terms of being able to carry out requirements in a speedy, effective process, but more so for our customers. It speaks volumes for them having one point of contact, be able to come in and deal with one entity as opposed to being bounced from department to department. especially for our restaurants. So the takeaway from that meeting with DPI, we thought a more viable solution short term would be, to maintain the continuity of the reviews and keeping the projects from being delayed while we transition possibly to that one-stop concept, would be to help HHS by help funding at least two positions. And we just realized that that's not as easy as stated. So, we're trying to figure out logistically how that can be done short term. But I think the long-term notion is to, figure out, how we can work that into the fold within, HHS and DPS working in a synergy to get that one-stop concept working at the Wheaton Center, and get one workflow for restaurants and other food service. I mean, we're kind of doing it. We have the workflow set up. When permits come in for restaurants, everything is automatically routed to HHS. But we really want to try to focus on how we can really highlight and promote that one-stop concept. The other part, as mentioned, was the education and outreach. As we realized from these tours, it's essential that that customers, stakeholders are aware of how to navigate our process. Sometimes we assume that they know what to do. We found out a lot of, in many cases, these restaurateurs, they take the task upon themselves. A lot of times we assume, they're going to get somebody, a permit runner or expediter to handle the permitting aspects. Some of them for financial reasons or just, choice, they rather go through it, do it themselves. And that's a challenge for many. So having as much information available, readily available, step by step to guide them through the process is essential. And we, since the last work session, have been meeting with both the Chamber, the Restaurant Association of Maryland, the Business Center here at Montgomery County. It's been a little slow, admittedly. As you can imagine, restaurant business owners are busy. But we've been really trying to get some essential feedback from them as far as what they are looking for in a really robust guidance document. So the participation, admittedly, we only got a few members. We hosted like 3 sessions last month, or maybe including the following month. And although the attendance was not what we wanted, we still got some important feedback. And one of the key things was, as we started to work on our revamping of the Recipe for Success guide sheet, was that, the language was too techie, for lack of a better term. And oftentimes, when we as permitting officials, when we put out documents, we sometimes don't realize from other people's perspective, that information is hard to understand because we're talking code language and processes that are, nuances that are new to them. So I think that's a very important takeaway, and we're now working with a consultant to go back to the table and produce a really robust system, not only for the restaurant, which is a priority guidance document, but for all of our guidance documents, special events, all our residential stuff, commercial building, to really have it written so that they understand, to have more visuals and charts and graphics, so that it's really clear what they need to do. I think it's important that we get it right as opposed to hastily putting out something. So we anticipate for the restaurant guidance document to be done with that one June at the latest, but for the complete system that we want to have developed, that will be early fall. And I'm really looking forward to that one because, again, that's one of our long-term initiatives that we look forward to in terms of streamlining our permitting process. We talk about timeframes, but a big part of reducing those timeframes is getting people educated on how to navigate our process. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As you were speaking, I was thinking, well, this is a perfect place for the regional services to be active and go to the restaurants. This is not going to work if you think that they're going to come to you. You got to have staff to go to that, and we already have paid staff to do this work with the regional service offices. So with that, I'm going to jump all of you for a second, and I'm going to go to Mr. Ken Hartman Espada, because I know the county executive has been working on this, and if you can please provide an update, that'd be great.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Fani-González. For the record, my name is Ken Hartman Espada. I'm with the Office of the County Executive, as you mentioned. I really appreciate, in the last few days, I've gotten up to speed on where we are with this, and in anticipation of something happening tomorrow, if I'm successful. But definitely the County Executive sincerely appreciates the Chair and the committee bringing this to our attention, that there are counties who managed to integrate plan review. We, as Director Sabakan mentioned, we're doing our research. We're working through some issues, workflow issues, with how do we integrate health plan review with permitting services plan review. Clearly, and that entails integrating separate fees and management. And as Director Sabakan mentioned, our interest is to see how those fees that we're collecting stay in the permitting services fund and can be then utilized to pay for the staff we need to put out in the field. So there may be some legislation needs that we'll come back to you, and I know our county attorney has been in touch with Christine Wellens on the specifics of where we are. But definitely, as you'll see the county executive's budget on Thursday, funding the health plan review is a priority for the executive. So as with the FY24 recommendation, FY25 we'll seek to address adding in the staff we need to expedite that review. But we haven't lost track of the broader goal of a seamless system, where everyone who touches a restaurateur as they go through the process is integrated, and they are, and we're identifying where there are delays. I think I was just speaking with our Dr. Ashford and Mr. Welsh about our fee structure for plan review, because remember, when this goes to the enterprise fund, it still needs to be self-supporting, and we talked about these fees haven't been updated in many years, but we can get into that as we talk about the FY25 budget. As far as the Recipes for Success program, absolutely, Director Sabakan and I have talked, and there's the business center, there's the regional centers, there are the urban districts, there are people out in the field, there are district council members who can say, and chambers of commerce, these are businesses, restaurateurs that we can put together in each region to give us feedback, so that we can complete that cycle. And we know that there are other jurisdictions that have these guides, and we have definitely downloaded a few, and as Director Sabakan mentioned, we're going to work through that and get out what is a product that we hope that you'll be very proud of.
Thank you so much for that. And I have contacted our legal department, and yes, we definitely need legislation. That's going to be one of the action items if the committee agrees, obviously, to ensure that we can, as a committee, work on legislation to make sure that this is possible. So while that gets drafted, we'll be dealing with the budget, and hopefully we'll have a final draft in a couple months, hopefully at the end, so we can introduce as soon as we're done with the budget. So that will be a goal. If the committee agrees, maybe I can ask a question now. How do you guys feel about that? You have questions? We're gonna go first with Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Sabakan, and Mr. Hartman as well. So, diving a little deeper into this issue, can you speak with whatever level of comfort you can or want regarding what the problems are with the streamlining as of right now? Right, we're alluding to legislative requests and such, but I think it is important and illustrative to say out loud what the problem is so that we know how best to fix it.
Sure. Thank you so much, Councilmember Glass, for that question. So the legal issue is if we were to pay for inspector positions out of the DPS fund, a change to Chapter 15 is going to be necessary to solve the issue. Right now, we have two separate funds where fees are collected into, and one is to enforce the health code, and the other is for the construction code. And they're in order to do this the right way and make sure the funds can be commingled. That's the legal change that we're trying to get to the bottom of.
A very technical change that would be required. Okay, that is helpful. And one thing. Oh, Mr. Director Chabacon, sorry.
I didn't know if you were specifically getting at the streamlining of the actual, permitting review process, or that issue per se.
If there's a second element or a second response,
I don't want to create something.
I'll indulge.
No, I think Ken's response phrased it correctly.
Now I'm intrigued.
Well,
tell me more.
All right. No, I guess I didn't know if you were getting at, again, going back to, what we identified from our early business tours after I arrived, specifically with these restaurants, what is the root issue here, within this sector, and it's not unlike the other, permits that we deal with on a regular basis. But these are unique in that, it's one of the few where there are multiple agencies or departments tied in it. We are the ambassadors of the permitting. That's no secret process in the county. But it's not just DPS. And with the food service, our grocery stores, our restaurants, our pools, our counterparts, our sister department, HHS plays an integral part as well. Yeah. We also have WSSC. So, and that's, that's where it's an understanding. It's important to understand not only, as a regulator, there are multiple people involved, but our stakeholders need to be keenly aware, just as basic as, hey, these are the departments that you have to deal with. And if we can in any way make that awareness as clear as possible, that's only going to help facilitate and make the process work easier for them. But I think maybe the earlier work session, the first one I was here, we really examined, our permitting timeframes as a whole, and that's where I think we have begun honing and reducing, target timeframes. Even publishing, one of the recent updates is now we finally have our dashboard out. And so we're transparent. And that's one of the feedback items we got. We want to know how long it takes. That's a basic necessity. They need to know, and that's what we fully recognize now. But I think as part of the time and focus on this, the streamlining, we recognize we've got to do the necessary things to reduce the overall permitting timeframes. Collectively, not just DPS, but working with WSSC as well, and making sure that we include all that information on our guidance documents to tie that in as well.
I agree with all of that, so thank you for that response. I'll just end on this note. We need to streamline. We have all shared our, experiences and anecdotal evidence that's been supplied to us by business owners and entrepreneurs. But one thing that I heard, and I just want to express caution about, is about the enterprise fund. I would have some heartburn if we were to streamline the process to make it easier and then increase the fees associated with that. I think that sends mixed messages, and that is not exactly the goal that is intended here. So as we work through drafting legislation and the impending regulations, we have to keep that in mind. So thank you.
Two things. One, and I appreciate the comments from Councilmember Glass, but also keep in mind some of these restaurants that have had really struggled to open up because of permitting, they have been closed for 6-7 months, paying rent because the process has failed them. So I'd rather pay a little bit more ahead of time and know exactly what my cost is, and avoiding the headaches of dealing with bureaucracy than, having a small fee and then being closed for 7-8 months. I mean, I have had business owners who have cried in front of me. Cried. And let me also be very clear, this issue doesn't discriminate. I have had business owners, restaurant owners who are Latinas, to the white folks who are very, who have an affluent restaurant. It doesn't discriminate, and that's a huge problem. So before you have a question, right? Can you, Mr. Welch, can you perhaps share your experience dealing with this situation and the lack of support that you have been receiving, or personnel, I should say?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question. As it goes without saying, we do not have staff to fulfill these positions. We have been doing this difficulty since I've been here 17 years. We've never had a plan review staff. It's always been part-time with our plan review and our field staff. And what we basically get into is our field staff inspections, our operation inspections are lacking because we're spending too much time on our plan review. We've had supervisors doing it. I ended up doing it. When somebody goes on maternity leave or out for leave for any purposes, it's all hands on deck. So we're pulling people from everywhere trying to fulfill these needs. The problem is it just can't be fulfilled the way that we're currently doing it.
Thank you for that, and I look forward to the operating budget, who will be better, I hope. Councilmember Balcombe.
Thank you. Again, a great discussion. So just a couple things. I'm really looking forward to the guidelines. I think that that will combine with the timeline efficiency, and hopefully there will just be efficiencies by educating the restaurant owners. But also it provides education for those of us who interface with those restaurant owners. So we get calls, and in my prior position, I worked very closely with restaurants, and the begging and the crying and the just hopelessness of will we ever open. So I think that's going to be great. I look forward to that. From the customer satisfaction, it's very difficult to get restaurants to participate, only because they work 16-hour days every day. And so I think that whatever we can do to help provide that feedback, I think is great. And please use us all as resources for that. I think that's important. In terms of the health inspectors, I'm agnostic about where the inspector actually sits. I think that Councilmember Glass's point is it's all well and good to make change, but if it's going to be a lot more costly, we need to think about that. But also we need to think about, and this is something that we've talked about not only in the restaurant sector, but just the culture of yes. So it's not necessarily the inspector or the process, but the inspectors have to be partners with the owner and making sure that the restaurant gets open, but the restaurant gets open safely and in a timely manner. And so I think that whatever the change happens, and if this requires, it sounds like it does require legislation, we have time to look at that legislation and vet it like we would do any legislation. And so we can look at the cost, and we can look at the efficiencies and whether it makes sense. But whoever does it has to be a partner in getting the restaurant open safely. And then also just from the perspective, and I know I may be an outlier here, but in terms of the enterprise fund, it's in the county's best interest that these restaurants open. Yeah. And so if we need to relook at the enterprise fund in itself, I know someone's got to pay for the cost, but we need to look at, if we're going to make any change, we need to look at it broadly to say, is the burden of opening a restaurant in Montgomery too great? And if so, we need to change that burden, because we need these restaurants to open. We need the town centers and the communities, and we need that vitality. So I think if we're going to look at it, let's look at the whole thing. So those are my thoughts.
I agree with you. Thank you so much for those remarks. And I think this is great timing, as you know, Mr. Walsh from HHS has mentioned, he doesn't have full-time employees to help him with this. If we transfer this to DPS and make sure that we deal with every single point that you mentioned, that would be a great thing. And that's thanks to this committee, by the way. So with that, you have your homework, follow out with the legal department to start working on legislation, and then the fees that we're going to be reviewing, and hopefully we'll get this done by the summertime. So we have plenty of time to deal with this. And then Mr. Ken Spada, again, use the regional services and everybody else that you can think of to ensure that we have that recipe for success as detailed and well written as possible in many languages, by the way. Yes, Councilmember Glass.
Thank you. Really good conversation, and I think the commonality between the first panel and this panel and the timing of it, I think are extremely good, because they tee up the budget and the need for personnel, the need for programs to support economic development, and I look forward to you being a staple of this committee in the near future. So thank you.
If we don't have any more comments, we are adjourned. Thank you so much for your time.
Who I am today.
Born and raised in Tacoma Park, Nikki was raised in a